Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election.
Vice President J.D. Vance used his first major speech on the international stage to berate European leaders. While delivering remarks at the Munich Security Conference, the vice president slammed the leaders for their response to different political views and, quote, running in fear of their own voters. Vance also defended the work of Elon Musk, whose DOGE committee continues to dismantle and defund government agencies. And on Thursday, the Department of Personnel Management instructed the leaders of agencies across the government to begin firing employees who are still in their probationary period. Joining me now is the Hill's national political reporter, Julia Manchester. Julia, it's so good to see you. Today, Vice President J.D. Vance was at the Munich Security Council, as you know. Let's take a listen to what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say today.
United States, they never saw us in NATO. They just spoke about it. But they really didn't want us in NATO.
Now, this comes on the heels of President Trump saying that Russia should rejoin the G7, suggesting that Ukraine could become a part of Russia at some point. Vice President Vance met with President Zelensky today. What do we know about their conversation?
Look, in terms of their conversation, I mean, we're still figuring out more. I haven't seen actually information on it. But look, it comes as we've seen a lot of members from the Trump administration, like Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, for example, sort of say that there is no chance that the U.S. will support right now Ukraine becoming a part of NATO. Now, we do know that, for example, Britain, the UK, has supported Ukraine becoming a part of NATO. So there is clearly tension there on the world stage. But it all comes as Russia has really shown a bit of force amid this summit. We know that Russian drone strike hit the shell of the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Ukraine. So it's certainly making a statement. So in terms of their conversation, look, I'm sure as we find out more going forward, we'll have that information. But certainly a lot of tension right now there.
J.D. Vance spent a lot of his time berating European leaders, likening them to Cold War tyrants. Do you think that this type of language endangers the U.S. influence in Europe at this point? You know,
it certainly creates more of that tension going forward. We know that there were a number of European officials, including from U.S. allies like Germany, who really pushed back on a lot of that rhetoric, equating it to a culture war, to being aggressive. And it comes at a time when I think a lot of European countries feel very vulnerable in the shadow of Russia amid this Ukraine war, and they would like the U.S. to be an ally, and they would like to have some sort of reassurance going forward that the U.S. will have their backs. But they didn't get that reassurance in that speech today. They didn't get that mention of the Ukraine war. Instead, it seemed to be on these cultural issues that, quite frankly, sort of harkened back to the U.S. campaign trail. So I think a lot of Europeans were angry or left scratching their heads, because this is supposed to be a conference, obviously, about defense and foreign policy, and that didn't really come up during these remarks.
Moving back here to Capitol Hill, the Office of Personnel Management, as you know, has directed agency leaders across the board, across the government, to really begin firing employees. Who could be impacted?
Well, we know that a number of federal employees from agencies like the Department of Education, for example, I believe the Department of Agriculture is also included in this. This is all about DOGE's continued efforts to really, tamp down on the size of the federal government, get rid of the bloat in many federal agencies and such. So I think that's what you're going to see going forward, this continued push in a number of these agencies. We saw that DOGE really began in many ways with USAID, but now they're starting to expand into other agencies, and this is the form it's taking right now.
One of those agencies is the IRS, and Democratic Senator Ron Wyden posted something on X about DOGE being inside the IRS. We have that up on the screen for you. This comes after Musk's DOGE has tried to gain access to the Treasury. It dismantled USAID, as you mentioned. What are they looking into at the IRS?
Well, they're looking into what we've seen them looking into in other government agencies, what they think are, excessive hirings or, people who DOGE might deem as non-essential. They're looking to cut down on, programs that they might deem as non-essential. They're trying to slim down all of these agencies. And as to what that looks like with the IRS, we'll have to see going forward as we get more information. But like I said, this is all part of a continued effort to slim down the federal government and start with these government agencies.
We're, of course, seeing some major pushback to this. 14 states have sued Musk, have sued President Trump, his administration, saying this is all unconstitutional, that Musk hasn't been confirmed by the Senate at this point. And there's this appointments clause in the Constitution that what Musk is doing is a violation of that. Seeing their legal argument, is this essentially a stalling tactic?
I mean, look, we're going to see these legal fights play out. We're going to see these legal fights play out from unions representing federal workers. I think you're going to see, obviously, defense from Elon Musk and DOGE. So, I mean, you could view it as a stalling tactic, sure, but I think a lot of this is so unprecedented in many ways that there's a lot of questions of the constitutionality of what's going on, what's legal, what isn't. This is going to be a debate going forward.
One of the Democrats pushing back on much of the Trump administration's agenda is Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She got into this public back and forth with Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, saying that, and he said that she could be in trouble for impeding law enforcement officers. What's going on there?
Right. I mean, look, this is just a debate over immigration. What can, we're going to see play out going forward between these two. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hitting back, saying, well, maybe Tom Homan should learn how to read. A bit of a snide remark there. But I mean, look, I don't think this is necessarily surprising. This is about, a debate over the authority that, Tom Homan has, the administration has, to carry out these mass deportations and what they look like.
Moving on to immigration, Democrats are, of course, fighting President Trump's immigration agenda, but Florida, for one, is embracing it. Governor Ron DeSantis there in Florida signed a sweeping immigration law on Thursday. What do we know about that new legislation?
Well, the new legislation is all about trying to partner with the Trump administration and aid the Trump administration in its immigration agenda in terms of Florida being a partner. And we know that DeSantis, for quite some time, was pushing for this, going back to last month when he called a special session for this legislation. But we actually saw a number of Republican state lawmakers push back against that, saying that DeSantis didn't have the authority to call that special legislature. And there was a debate for a few weeks, an inter-party debate, and Trump sort of got in the middle of it because you had DeSantis and then Republican state legislature leaders on the other side saying, well, we're more Trump, we support Trump more, but this is how we think we should do it in terms of immigration. They finally came to a compromise earlier this week. We have this legislation. So you have Florida really trying to become a model for other states in terms of how to enforce Trump's immigration policy.
From across the pond to Florida to here in D.C., you cover it all, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
TikTok has returned to Apple and Google app stores Thursday evening following President Trump's delay on the video sharing app's ban. Former President Biden signed a bipartisan bill into law last April ordering the app's parent company ByteDance to divest and sell or face a ban. There was growing concern among national security officials and lawmakers that Chinese-owned ByteDance could access user data or spy on American citizens. The app was removed from stores after it was shut down in the U.S. when it failed to find a buyer by the official deadline. The move comes after newly appointed Attorney General Pam Bondi told Apple and Google the ban would not be immediately enforced. Several individuals and companies have thrown their hat in the ring to potentially buy the app, including former LA Dodgers owner Frank McCourt, Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary, Microsoft, and Oracle. New tariffs on steel and aluminum starting next month. What does that mean for consumers? In today's Political Minute, News Nation chief Washington correspondent and host of The Hill, Blake Berman, breaks it all down.
The money behind those steel and aluminum tariffs. I'm Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation. Starting March 12th, new blanket tariffs on steel and aluminum imports are scheduled to go into effect. President Trump calling for a 25% rate with no exceptions. The current rate for many of those products is 10%, according to the White House. Now, steel and aluminum are used in, for example, construction. The cans that hold items like soda, beer, fruits, and vegetables contain some steel and aluminum. Nearly 70% of that material is imported, according to the Can Manufacturers Institute. Now, this will have an impact on several trading partners. For example, some of the top iron and steel importers to the U.S. last year include Canada, Brazil, and Mexico. For aluminum, the top include Canada, Mexico, and China. I'm Blake Berman, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
You can find more news and analysis from Blake and his colleagues 24/7 on News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, has threatened to sue Google over its decision to rename the Gulf of Mexico on its Maps platform. President Trump issued the executive order in late January to change the body of water to the Gulf of America. Sheinbaum denounced Google's decision during a press conference Thursday, arguing the entire body of water should not be renamed because the executive order only applies to the U.S. continental shelf. The changes apply for U.S. users after the U.S. Geographic Names Information System made the Gulf of America official. Apple Maps and Bing Maps have also updated their platforms to reflect the change. Users in Mexico will continue to see the Gulf of Mexico. Other parts of the world will also see that name followed by the Gulf of America in parentheses. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Judy Kurtz. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.